Good morning and welcome. My name is Magali Roy-Piquier, Associate Professor and Chair of Gender and Women's Studies, and now Interim Chair of Africana Studies. It is my honor and privilege to be part of this annual campus-wide commemoration, King Day 2017. Knox College celebrates the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I would like to welcome all the students, members of the faculty, staff, prospective students and their parents, as well as the members of the Galesburg community who are gathered here to reflect and reaffirm Dr. King's vision of the beloved community. Welcome. I also want to recognize those who have lent their enthusiastic support, as always, to the planning of this activity. Knox College President Teresa Amat, Dean Laura Belling, Vice President of Enrollment and Dean of Admissions Paul Stevens, and everyone. Finally, also the students, staff, faculty who have contributed their energies and enthusiasm to make this event a reality. Today, all over the United States, people and ordinary citizens and activists are taking part of celebrations like this one. We will open our program with a musical tribute by the Knox College Choir and Friends, led by Professor Laura Lane. Please help me to welcome the Knox College Choir.
This year we have invited anybody who wanted to come and sing this freedom song with us to join us. So you see some extra people up here, and we'd also like to invite any of you to sing along. If you know this song, just feel free to sing. So this is Woke Up This Morning.
I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Yes, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Walking and talking with my mind stayed on freedom. Yes, walking and talking with my mind stayed on freedom. Well, walking and talking with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. 'Cause it ain't no harm to keep your mind stayed on freedom. No, it ain't no harm to keep your mind stayed on freedom. Oh, it ain't no harm to keep your mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Yes, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Next, I would like to invite President Teresa Amat to the podium to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much. I want to add my welcome to Professor Roy Fakir's opening remarks, but also to thank her for organizing this annual event to celebrate the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My thanks also to today's speakers who will be sharing their reflections with us, and to the Knox College Choir and friends for lifting every voice in song. I mentioned earlier today at another event that I was a junior in high school the day that Dr. King was assassinated. And I remember well that the many decades of his life's work up to that day were characterized by virulent divisiveness and countless acts of violence. And if today's remembrances of Dr. King across the nation are to be at all meaningful, we need to cast aside the gauzy veils of sentiment in which he has been shrouded. We need to remember him in the historical context of ugly truths. And that means recognizing the parallels between his era and ours. As Dr. King noted, the oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. Last year at this time, I went back to read Dr. King's final book, which was entitled prophetically, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And in that book, he wrote these words. One of the great liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. Every society has its protectors of the status quo and its fraternities of the indifferent. But today our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. And the choice between the status quo and social change remains our challenge today. Whether the cause be racial justice, economic equality, human rights, environmental justice, sustainability, as a community and as individuals, let us stay awake. Let us adjust to new ideas. Let us remain vigilant, and let us face the challenge of change. I very much look forward to today's speakers for their words of inspiration and illumination in these times, that we may heed Dr. King's challenge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amar. Next to the podium is Dean Laura Belling. Please help me to welcome her.
Good morning to all, and to our guests, welcome to Knox College. We are glad that you have joined us this morning. Today we create time in our usual class schedule to stop for some moments in celebration and gratitude for the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The significant moments of King's life are well known. The bus boycott in 1955-56, his jailing in Birmingham, Alabama, the March on Washington, and his famous I Have a Dream speech. Some people in this room and at this college have memories of King as he marched and boycotted and spoke, and may even have marched and boycotted and spoke themselves as the civil rights movement unfolded. Others in this room, the vast majority of students here, and an increasing number of faculty and staff at this college, including me, weren't there. Born late in or after King's shortened life. We've only heard his speeches as recordings. But I think we, all of us born too late for King's civil rights movement, have been born just at the right time for our own. So for all of us, those who shared time on the planet with King and those who did not, it is imperative that we be cognizant of our interrelatedness and our own place in time, and the effect that actions and words and injustice and ignorance have on all. And together work, as we do at Knox College every day, and in what King referred to as the great glory of American democracy, to work toward the world that King imagined. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean Bailey. Next to the podium is Professor Conrad Hamilton, Associate Professor of History and the Burkhardt Distinguished Chair in History. He's also Chair of the American Studies Program this year. Professor Hamilton teaches courses in America in the 1960s, Martin Luther King and American Biography, the Civil Rights Movement, Comparative History of Slavery in the Americas, Environmental Racism, and Cinema. He's currently working on a project entitled From Sweetback to Selma, the reimagining of the civil rights era in 21st century Black cinema. The title of his talk today is A Path Forward During Dark Times, Reflections on the Legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Help me to welcome Professor Hamilton to the podium.
We'll be the first to take advantage of the water. Welcome to faculty and to students, community members, prospective students, and your parents. And thank you for being with us this morning. To the list of thank yous to all the people who've helped to put this on. You know, we've been doing this celebration in one form or another since 2001. And as you might imagine, there are a lot of moving pieces behind the scenes that have to be coordinated. And the person who's been in charge of coordinating that since 2001 is Professor Magali Roy-Fekir. Could we give her a round of applause, please? Well, today is the 16th time that we have had this celebration of Martin Luther King's life and legacy at Knox College. Each time we have done this event, our goal has been to make the King holiday more than simply a remembrance of great deeds of the past, and to try and understand the ways in which the contributions of Martin Luther King Jr. continue to be of use to Americans and people around the world today. 8 years ago, we stood on this stage just days before the inauguration of Barack Obama. Some saw the election of the first black president as proof that America had finally left the legacy of slavery and racial discrimination behind, and that we had achieved Dr. King's dream of the beloved community. Today we gather under somewhat different circumstances. In some ways, I think that Dr. King is even more relevant now than he was 8 years ago. Once again, we stand at the beginning of a new presidential administration, but that is where the similarity ends. I believe that most Americans, regardless of how they vote, aspire to the goals and values that Dr. King espoused throughout his life: fairness, justice, respect and compassion in dealing with others. In essence, the golden rule of treating others the way that we would want them to treat us. And this is why the aftermath of the 2016 presidential campaign raises a number of problems. As we prepare for the inauguration of President Obama's successor in just a few days, we do so with the knowledge that we will soon have a president who ran and won with a campaign that appealed to none of these values that we celebrate today. Our challenge then is twofold. First, how do we ensure the health and survival of these fundamental human and American values that Dr. King literally gave up his life for, in light of the evidence that the new president may not share these values? Second, how do we reject those values that we find so objectionable, while not sinking to the negative level of thought and speech that has come to define our public discourse? How do we win without turning into that which we oppose? The first step, it seems to me, is to realize that we won't get very far if we insist upon maintaining our identities as anti-Trump voters or pro-Trump voters. To do so obfuscates other things that we hold in common as Americans and prevents opportunities to work together for the good of the society that we share. Martin Luther King had no partisan litmus test for supporters of his movement, and he never endorsed presidential candidates. As a result, the greatest successes of the civil rights movement came about when radicals in the streets, Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and the moderates and politically unaffiliated in the general public all pushed in the same general direction. Such an approach, of course, would demand something from each of us. If you did not vote for Trump, then you would have to work to separate your dislike of his conduct and values from the family members, friends, fellow students, and fellow citizens who voted for him. The right to vote freely for whomever you want is the bedrock principle of democracy. We cannot celebrate political participation only when others vote the way we would vote, and condemn those who exercise their constitutional right in favor of a candidate we don't like. And let us also admit that just as everyone who voted for Barack Obama in 2008 did not do so because they wanted to end racism, not everyone who voted for Trump in 2016 did so because they wanted to promote bigotry. In fact, a small but significant numbers of voters supported both Obama and Trump. On the other hand, if you voted for Trump, you would have to be honest enough to admit that when you vote for a candidate who makes openly racist, anti-immigrant, anti-woman, and anti-democratic statements, some people might reasonably conclude that you must agree with these views. If you do not share these attitudes, then it is not enough to simply say, I'm not a racist, I just voted for the candidate endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan, but I'm not a racist. Or to coyly suggest that you don't agree with everything that Trump says without specifying what that actually means. Actions speak louder than words. If the person you voted for truly does not represent your personal views of inclusion, fairness, and ethical conduct, then what actions are you going to take today and over the next 4 years to express who you really are? Not to prove anything to someone else, but so that you can look at yourself in the mirror and know where Trump ends and you begin. For those too young to have experienced the America that Dr. King lived in, it might seem as if our current challenge is new and unique. It is not. While the details are different, Dr. King faced the same basic problem throughout his public life that we have now. How to confront divisive issues like racism, war, and economic inequality, while simultaneously building a loving community that includes those who disagree with you. Central to Reverend King's philosophy and method was the Greek concept of agape love. Agape means nothing sentimental or basically affectionate, King wrote in 1957. It means understanding, redeeming, goodwill for all men, and overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. When we love on the agape level, we love men not because we like them, not because their attitudes and ways appeal to us, but because God loves them. Here we rise to the position of loving the person who does the evil deed while hating the deed he does. For Reverend King, then, nonviolence meant not just the absence of physical violence, but the absence of hate towards one's opponent. Nonviolence meant that all people retain their basic value as human beings, regardless of what they do or whether or not we like them. This, it seems to me, is an important principle for all of us to keep in mind as we look for ways to work with each other in the days and years ahead. It is important to remember that King's approach of agape love came not from someone isolated from danger or divorced from the world, but from an activist under personal, daily physical threat from those who opposed him. The principle of agape love appealed to Dr. King precisely because it was useful in addressing his very real situation. His was a dynamic activism, nonviolent direct action, he called it, that placed agape love at the center of a method designed to address the divisive conflicts within this country without destroying the possibility for eventual reconciliation. King's commitment to nonviolent direct action required him and his followers to confront the policies that they disagreed with, even to the point of going to jail. When he broke Southern segregation laws or local ordinances banning demonstrations, King's sense of agape required that he not evade arrest. One who breaks an unjust law must do it openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty, King wrote in 1963. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty by staying in jail to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the very highest respect for the law. More than any other American leader, Martin Luther King was able to make concrete and lasting gains in expanding American freedom while avoiding the crippling divisiveness that threatens our society today. As he was fond of saying, the end is redemption and reconciliation. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. Dr. King's example of nonviolent direct action demonstrates that it is possible to be a militant and effective advocate for positive social values without resorting to hostility and hatred towards those who attempt to stand in your way. But it demonstrates something else as well. The civil rights movement is not the story of the people electing the right president. It is the story of the committed, focused, and sustained collective activism of the people requiring presidents to do the right thing. For King and his partners in the movement, voting was only the beginning of democratic participation. They didn't depend upon presidents, the Congress, political parties, to champion the causes they cared about. They understood that social change does not come from politicians riding in on white horses. Politicians and political structures respond to pressure, and grassroots activism can generate that pressure. It was the collective people power of the civil rights movement that pushed a reluctant Republican president by the name of Dwight Eisenhower to enforce school desegregation in Little Rock, Arkansas, and to sign the first federal civil rights law of the 20th century. Democratic Party presidents Kennedy and Johnson are often described as champions of civil rights. Yet Kennedy refused to introduce any civil rights legislation until pressured by King's protest campaign in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. Nor would he enforce a Supreme Court ban on racial segregation in interstate transportation until the Freedom Riders of SNCC forced the issue. President Johnson was crucial to the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, a piece of legislation, however, which would never have existed in the first place without the persistent pressure of grassroots civil rights activists. But Johnson also had to be pushed by the grassroots protest campaign in Selma, Alabama, to secure the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In response to civil rights movement pressure, Republican President Richard Nixon surprisingly did more than any previous president to cement affirmative action into public policy. This is not to say that presidents do not matter. Through court and agency appointments, legislation and executive action, and decisions as commander-in-chief, Donald Trump will have the potential to affect all of our lives for some time to come. But just as Obama was not able to exorcise all of America's demons, Trump will not be able to destroy our best values. It is those values around which we must now rally. The Civil Rights Coalition led presidents to do the right thing, regardless of party or personal philosophy. Presidents from competing political parties came to do the right thing because Americans of goodwill from across political beliefs and parties joined in common cause in support of voting rights to end legalized racial discrimination. This is important for us to reflect upon. There was a time in our history when radicals, conservatives, and liberals worked together on issues that were bigger than their particular interests. We can do so again. We may or may not use the same methods that Dr. King pioneered in the middle of the last century. It is worth noting that street protests and civil disobedience were the actions of people with no other reasonable options. Participants in the Montgomery movement did not even have the right to vote. But whether we take to the streets or take to Twitter, we should do so with the spirit of agape that was at the core of all of King's words and actions. Perhaps we will see the formation of a new civil rights coalition focusing on issues like immigration, religious freedom, or mass incarceration. Or maybe the fundamental issue of how we run our elections, from the influence of money in politics to the reform of an electoral college system that has now 5 times put a president in office who lost the popular vote. Perhaps this will attract activists from across ideological divides. Reverend King himself suggested a direction for collective action before he died that still has tremendous resonance in our time. When he was assassinated in Memphis almost 50 years ago, Reverend King died supporting striking garbage workers in a campaign for economic justice. 4 days before he died, Reverend King developed what became his last Sunday sermon at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., in which he questioned American resolve to, as he put it, bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. Had he lived, Dr. King planned a second march on Washington, D.C., this time as the leader of the Poor People's March. One of the issues that animated Bernie Sanders supporters, Trump voters, Hillary voters, and many who voted for third-party candidates is the widening wealth gap between the wealthiest Americans and the rest of us. When Dr. King spoke about growing economic inequality, America was in the middle of unprecedented prosperity compared to today. Unemployment was at 3.6%, and the rate of poverty was under 13% and declining. But the wealth gap between the richest and the rest of us has been growing since the 1970s. According to a recent report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, 50% of all American personal wealth is in the hands of the top 3% of the population. If we spend the next 4 years revisiting the battles of the 2016 election, then we stand to lose sight of the tremendous opportunity to build a massive, nonpartisan movement based upon American ideals of economic justice. Will it be difficult to get Trump and Clinton voters to sit down with Green Party and libertarians in a coalition? No more difficult than it was for conservatives in the NAACP to work in unison with the student radicals of SNCC in the Civil Rights Coalition. No more difficult than getting Democrats and Republicans to work together to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. If we are to come together across political differences to find our common core as citizens of goodwill, then it seems to me that there's no better place to start than here at a liberal arts college. Here we are uniquely positioned to engage in open, serious, and principled discussion, even and especially when we disagree, without resorting to the cowardly and intellectually dishonest name-calling and personal attacks that has poisoned so much of our national discourse. Such a commitment to civil dialogue and collective action does not mean that we refuse to criticize ideas and actions with which we disagree, nor should we be so thin-skinned as to react with anger and hostility when someone brings scrutiny to our own ideas and actions. But there's a right way to criticize and a wrong way. Too many of our elected leaders have demonstrated the wrong way. Let us not seek to emulate their poor example. Rather, on this day, Martin Luther King Day, let us resolve to take the path set by Dr. King. Participation in electoral politics is an important part of our obligation as citizens in a democratic republic. But let us not insist that who we choose to vote for is all that defines us, for good or ill, as people. Dr. King sought to unite people from across the political and ideological spectrum in common effort for the common good. We can and must continue this work. On this day, the day that we choose to honor the values of King, let us commit to work together when we can, argue and debate with civility and mutual respect when we must. Because I teach about Dr. King, I am often asked what would have happened if he had lived. Would Dr. King have been able to transform America into the beloved community of his dreams? I hope that it is clear at this point in my talk why I think this is the wrong question. The real question is, what are each one of us going to do to transform America into the community of our dreams? History teaches us that nothing, whether good or ill, is ever settled forever. Presidents come and go, but each generation has its own responsibility in shaping society for better or worse. The example of Martin Luther King teaches us not only how to meet our collective responsibility, but that it is indeed possible for us to do so. And because it is possible, it is our responsibility as citizens to try. In the words of Dr. King, human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. So we must help time and realize that the time is always right to do right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hamilton. Next, I have the pleasure to invite Dr. Kwame Zulu Shabazz to the podium. Professor Shabazz is a visiting instructor in Africana Studies. He holds a master's degree and doctorate in social anthropology from Harvard University. His research spans the Atlantic world from Ghana to Sierra Leone, to Malcolm X to Teofilo Benga. The title of Professor Shabazz's talk is, "If You Kill the Fireman, Your House Should Burn Down. Martin Luther King, Black Death, and the Limits of Heroism." Please, help me to welcome Brother Shabazz to the podium.
Good morning, beloved community. All right. I want to echo the sentiments of the other speakers. A special welcome to the parents and prospective students. We're excited to have you here to join us on this important day as we celebrate the ideas of a great man who was cut down too early in his life. Those ideas live on. And so I wish you all a happy King Day. I'm Kwame Zulu Shabazz. I'm an instructor in our Africana Studies program here. And I just wanted to note too, I consider Brother Conrad Hamilton a friend, and his knowledge of the civil rights movement is just phenomenal. I'm always awestruck by it and just humbled to know him. He's a brilliant man. Now my ideas and my knowledge is really what followed after King was assassinated, that is the Black Power movement. But I'm suggesting that in the time leading up to King's death, King was sounding a lot like Malcolm X. And I'll talk about that a bit more as I progress. Now, as I was thinking about flopping around for topics, I asked my wife about my first idea. And she said to me, and I knew the look right away, it was a bad idea. And she said, Kwame, you have to give the people hope. You have to give the people hope. And I agree. I agree, she's right. But sometimes, and I'm echoing the words of our president, she said that the historical context of the ugly truth, and that's exactly right. Sometimes the truth can be so horrifying and so ugly that it can sound like despair. And that's the truth I'll be speaking today. My talk is divided into 3 parts. The first part is called The Myth. Oh, actually, no, too. I changed my title slightly. I thought it was too cumbersome and too many things were going on. So the title is just simply Martin Luther King, Black Death, and the Myth of the Black Superhero. The first part, and the talk is in 3 parts. The first part is about the myth of the black superhero. Part 2 is about the myth of American democracy. And then part 3 is a bit provocative, but I'm suggesting that that Donald Trump, sorry. Donald Trump. Look at Dr. King. Donald Trump is a necessary evil. Donald Trump is necessary. All right, part 1, the myth of a black superhero. And I say this, I want to emphasize too, that all of this is in love. I wouldn't be standing here before you if I didn't love you. I love all of you. I love my students. I love you parents who are here with your students who are thinking about coming to Knox. But sometimes you have to give tough love. Today is a day of tough love. All right, so in the spirit of love, I want to note that Dr. King was jailed over 20 times. He was assaulted countless times, I don't know how many times. His house was firebombed. He was stabbed. His mother was killed in a church. His father's father, or no, his mother's father, his grandfather's mother's side was spied on by the federal government. His father was spied on by the federal government. So he comes from a long line of dissenters, of protesters, of activists. And of course, Dr. King was also targeted by the FBI. The so-called intelligence group that we're now fighting about, the Russians, the FBI spied on Dr. King, and I suggest conspired on his death. Now, when there was a reporter who was responsible for covering the funeral of Dr. King, he later went to a dinner party where in attendance were wealthy white people. And there was one woman at the party who told Halberstam, the reporter, quote, "I wish you had spit in his face for me. I wish you had spit in his face for me." That's what she said about this amazing man who had been assassinated a day before, on the same day. And I want to note that that sentiment was not uncommon. Dr. King was not popular when he died. There was a study, a poll taken to investigate Dr. King's popularity amongst whites just literally months before he died. And it turns out that roughly 30% of white America approved of Dr. King. Roughly 70% were opposed to him. 70% of white America. He was not a popular man. In fact, he was opposed by many of his followers, or the inner circle of his group. They thought he was too radical. We started speaking out against the war and against poverty and talking about redistributing wealth. They thought that was distracting from the objective. So even today, I guess the bar is a bit low today. Even if only 30% of the white people today like we talk, I will be in good company. All right, so also, let's see, Lester Maddox, the governor of Georgia, declared that King was, quote, an enemy of the country. And he was right. The federal government, J. Edgar Hoover, the leader of the FBI, said that Dr. King was the most dangerous man in America. And they did everything to undermine him, to terrorize him and his family. This is the federal government. And it wasn't just Dr. King. Malcolm X and many of the leaders of the Black Freedom Movement were targeted by the FBI. Also, there was Geronimo Gijada Pratt, who was a Black Panther Party member of the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party, in fact. He was a decorated soldier. from Louisiana. He wound up here, just like I did. My people from New Orleans, and my mother wound up migrating to Los Angeles. And G. Java Pratt did the same thing. He became involved in the Black Panther Party. And the FBI set him up. They targeted him specifically because of his knowledge of arms and defense and military training. And they set him up for a murder in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, a crime they knew he could not have committed because they were surveilling him. They knew exactly where he was at the time when the murder happened. And so Geronimo Pratt served jail time, 27 years, for a crime that our government knew he could not have committed. And I remember this case very vividly because when he was released finally, the sentence was vacated, and he was released 27 years later. Several members of the activist group in Los Angeles, we caught a bus to Orange County to witness the act of him being liberated from prison. And it was just an extraordinary day I'll never forget. And there are so many others I could go on all day. I'll mention just a few more. In Chicago, just down the road here, 3 hours away, there was a dynamic young leader of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. His name was Fred Hampton. Chairman Fred Hampton was executed by the Chicago police and the FBI while he lay in his bed to sleep. Sleep in his bed. Also, his pregnant wife was shot. She survived. And his son, Fred Hampton Jr., is an activist to this day in Chicago. Mark Clark was also killed that day. He was the head of the Peoria chapter of the Black Panther Party. He died on that day. Medgar Evers, the field officer of the Jackson, Mississippi branch of the NAACP. Medgar Evers was killed in his driveway. He come home from a long day of struggle against racism, white supremacy, and he was going into his home, getting out of his car, going into his home. He was shot dead by a white man who was across the street and hiding behind some bushes. In his driveway, he was murdered. His wife and family were in the house at the time. Medgar Evers. Malcolm X's father was killed by white men. Malcolm X's three uncles of Malcolm X killed by white men. Malcolm X died in Harlem, New York, at the Audubon Ballroom, February 21st, 1965, at the hands of black men, but instigated by the FBI, who boasted about it. They boasted about dividing Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, just as they divided the Black Panther Party and the US organization in Los Angeles, which resulted in several deaths also. The United States government is the hand behind a lot of the divisions that exist within the black community. And they've been directly responsible for the deaths of African Americans. In short, what I'm telling you is that what you have learned in your history classes, you learned about the civil rights movement, you learned about slavery, many of you learned about Jim Crow. If we properly understand that history, we understand that the United States government has been at war with its black citizens. The United States government has been at war with its black citizens, and we're still fighting that war. Black people, white people, progressive white people, Latino people, we're fighting that war to this very day. Part 2, the myth of American democracy. Now you all, as young children, if you're Americans, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. You guys know the rest? What does it say? One nation under God. Liberty and justice for all. But black people have never known justice in America. We've never known democracy. We do not know what democracy is. In fact, I would suggest that America has never been democratic. So on this point, I disagree with my esteemed brother, comrade, and I would say the majority of Americans. I don't think America is democratic. What I think is happening is that America has a rhetoric of democracy. Barack Obama gives pretty speeches, and we clap, and we salute him. But he's bombed 7 countries. He's bombed civilians, men, women, children. So Donald Trump is very honest. You know, we know what he stands for. Barack Obama gives pretty speeches and says he upholds those foundational principles, but he's bombing innocent people. And the justification, if we're really honest, the rationale for it is acceptable simply because they're Muslims. That's why we do it. It's okay because they're Muslims. They're civilians, they're people just like us. They love, they have fights, they get married. In fact, some of them have been bombed during wedding ceremonies. Some of them bombed during funerals. But the American public says nothing about it. Well, most of us don't say much about it. Some of us do say things about it. But most of us don't. Why? Because they're not like us. That's why. So the myth of American democracy. Now, I don't know if some of you got a chance to watch the events yesterday where they were confirming the nomination of Jeff Sessions for Attorney General of the United States. Did any of you see that? How many of you saw it? Go home and watch it tonight on C-SPAN and wherever it's showing. I want to highlight specifically the ideas, the words of Cory Booker. Now, I have lots of issues with Cory Booker, in fact, but he did a good job yesterday. And basically, he made the case that an attorney general can't just stand for law and order. In fact, the principle of law and order is racist. The principle of law and order is racist. That is to say, law and order has historically been used to maintain the status quo. If you're black in America, and especially if you're like myself, you grew up in the ghetto, and I lived in all the ghettos of Los Angeles, Compton, South Central, Watts. I spent my formative years in Inglewood, California. If you grew up in that environment, you know that the police are basically just another gang. The police have historically been the enemy of black people, dating back to slavery. Policing in the U.S. has its origins in slavery. Slave patrols, where white men on horses would move around on various plantations to ensure that black people were in their place. You have to have a pass to go from plantation to plantation. And God forgive you if you didn't have your pass. That's how policing starts in the United States. And it hasn't gotten any better for black people. The history of policing in Chicago is horrendous. I was just telling my students this morning, from roughly around the 1950s, late 40s or so, the police in Chicago basically operated as assassins of any effort on behalf of black people to demand justice. And even in more recent times in Chicago, there's been a major lawsuit. Torture. The Chicago Police Department has lost a $1 million lawsuit charging that police department with torture. And this happened all over the United States. So, what I'm telling you is, what I'm sharing with you is that the structures of our democracy, the policing, the police structure, the juridical system where we make our laws, the education system, the healthcare system, all of our structures that make us who we are, this is where the real struggle is going to be. It's not going to be against Donald Trump and his foolishness, his commentary, or individuals who utter hateful remarks. It's not about that at all. It's not about Donald Trump. It's not about Bill Clinton or Democrats. It's not about Hillary Clinton, who's had a devastating impact on black people, dating back to the late 80s, when she was a surrogate for the Democratic leadership convention. And their idea was that the Democratic Party cannot compete with the Republicans if we continue to be beholden to black people, to women, to labor. We have to act like Republicans. Bill Clinton was a leader of that movement. Hillary Clinton was a surrogate. It was under that policy, under that movement in which Bill Clinton changed the welfare laws. And Bill Clinton also signed the Omnibus Crime Bill. Those were racist acts. They were aimed at attracting white votes and saying to white people that the Democratic Party is not beholden to black people. Those are our friends. So we're friends like that. They don't need enemies. So, Cory Booker said something really important during that confirmation hearing, and he did something unprecedented. It's unusual, in fact, it hadn't happened before, at such a setting for a senator to openly oppose the nominee. But Cory Booker did it, and I applaud him for that. And he said that an attorney general basically has to be an activist. You have to be an activist. You have to bend the arc of justice towards people who've been treated unjustly. And he's right. You have to be an activist. You can't stand on law and order because law and order has been used as an excuse, as a rationale for oppressing black people. I agree. But where Booker, I think, erred is this idea that justice is a foundational principle of the United States. It is not. It is something that we should work towards, but it's not something that many of us have ever done. And in fact, there's a book I recommend for you to read by Marimba Ani. It's called Yurugu. Her last name is A-N-I. Yurugu is spelled Y-U-R-U-G-U. And she calls these ideas the rhetorical ethic. So ideas like rhetorical ethic, democracy, freedom, civil rights. These are words that American leaders use rhetorically, but they don't put them into action. They don't do anything substantive, including Barack Obama. They haven't done anything concrete to make that a reality for all Americans. All right. Lastly, and I'll make this section brief and quick. Donald Trump, I believe, is necessary evil. And here's why. Had Hillary Clinton won, as everyone thought she was going to win, in fact, I watch a lot of Fox News. Even Fox News, they were shocked that Donald Trump had won. Donald Trump was shocked that he had won. We were all shocked that Donald Trump had won, in fact. But I think it was a blessing in disguise. Had Hillary Clinton won, there'd be women, many white women especially, celebrating that this was a victory for women, that this was some sort of victory for democracy, that we turned away the evil one whom people have compared to Hitler, which I think is ridiculous. We'd be complacent. But guess what? Donald Trump is here. He's the president-elect, and now we're not complacent. It's necessary. Because if we're really going to change America in a way that's substantive, we're going to have to look ourselves in the mirror